Hey, you. Welcome to the What Reading Book Podcast, the no boring zone where we get you all excited about books that are worth reading.
On the What Reading Podcast, you get some unbiased take on books, juicy scoops of what runs through the minds of your favorite author. You can call us your virtual book connoisseurs that help you filter through the many books out there and let you know the ones worth reading.
On this podcast, we talk about different book genre. We do not discriminate. From fiction to non-fiction, poetry, biographies, memoirs, you name it, so long as it is written by an author of African descent and project our very own authentic African stories. You can count us in. So welcome on board and thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Hello, everyone. Good to have you here again on another episode of the Worth Reading Podcast. Like you have come to know, I do this with Toby Enyade, a fellow bibliophile, and this is another episode that we believe you would find not just very interesting, but very insightful and educative. And also, it's a commemorative episode because March, as we know it, is the month for the women, for our mothers, for our aunts, our sisters, and everything that a woman means to you. Toby, how are you doing today?
Hi Shay, lovely to be here. I'm very well, thank you, and I'm super excited about the Mountain March and that we're doing this particular episode because I couldn't have thought of a better guest for us to have on the show to discuss a book that actually would be of interest to every female gender. So, if you want to be the one to do the honors of introducing our guest very quickly.
Yeah, of course I will. So I'll just drop a few hints while I read her bio. This is someone that I've come to know for quite some time. She's a public figure, so as much as I try to boast that I've come to know her, you also listeners have also come to know her out in the public. But first of all, the part that caught my eye in her bio is that she finished from the best university in the world, Obafemi Awolowo University. She's
Yes.
a feminist activist, policy advocate, social change philanthropy practitioner, and writer. She has a
Yeah.
BA and MA in history from the University of Ife, Nigeria. Well, OAU, if you didn't catch
Now
that.
Obafemi Awolowo University, actually.
Yeah. And she also received an MA in gender and society from Middlesex University in the UK. She's the founder of Above Whispers Media Foundation, which specializes in leadership development for women. She runs an online community called abovewhispers.com. Some people may have started to, put one and two together.
I
She
guess.
writes an immensely popular weekly column called Loud Whispers, and she set up the Rapper Network, an online mentoring and support program for over 4,000 young women. She has served as a UN Women Nigeria Senior Advisor and is currently a visiting senior research fellow at the African Leadership Center, King's College, London. In recent times, we've come to know her as the First Lady of Ekiti State for two terms at two different points in time in the history of Ekiti State. And one thing that I always remember about her time as First Lady is how she actively pushed for the enactment of the law against gender-based violence and how that has become something to look out for. So it's so good to have you here, Ma, Erelu, and I don't know how many people have already caught who we are having here, but we have here Erelu, Bisi Adeleye-Fayemi. Good to have you here, Ma. Good afternoon. Welcome
I
to
wish I
our
could
podcast.
Thank you so much, Sheyi. Thank you, Toby. It's really great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, Ma. So, good to have you here, like I said, and we'll just dive right into it. First of all, I think one question that I've always tried to ask is, you're a very active writer, and it's something that is not so common, not just for a politically inclined person, but very many public figures. The only thing that we get to see from them are maybe their autobiographies or just something that just chronicles their life in some form of way or the other. But with you, we see someone that is very particular about writing, very deliberate about it, and not just flimsy writing, as it were. All writings are valid, right? But this is you writing on very topical issues, but writing it from from a different perspective, from a more witty perspective, as it were. So how do you really find that time? What has writing meant to you, and how have you really found that time to strike a balance between your public personality and then that quiet moment of penning thoughts on paper?
Thank you very much, Toby. I don't want to sound like those famous artists, singers, musicians, actors who say to people, "Oh, I started doing this when I was 3 or 4." But well, I did start writing at a very young age. And it was simply
Okay.
because at the time our parents were always looking for ways to keep us engaged beyond
Yeah.
the few hours they would allow us to watch television.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we didn't have video games, we didn't have phones or all those things that kids have these days to keep themselves busy. We played outdoor games, and if you were inside, you watched television. And so my father said that I had to write an essay for him every Tuesday and every
Wow.
Thursday. And this
Wow.
was
Wow.
me from the age of 7. And so I
Wow.
started writing these essays, yes, from when I was 7. We had just come back from England then, and I was at Grace Children's School, nursery primary school in Lagos. And so my father
Lagos.
would then read and grade my essays. And then after a while, he started sharing them with his friends with so much pride in his voice. And look at what my daughter has written. She's only 7, she's only 8, she's only 9, she's only 10. And, so he would get really excited. And he started nurturing, that love of writing. He believed I had a gift. And he started to nurture it, he started to encourage me. He used to write himself occasionally, although he was an
Oh, okay.
accountant. And that is how I started to write. And so I've written on and off over the years. In my free time, I would write poetry. And then the writing I did the most when I started my professional career was scholarly writing or essays that I had to write by virtue of the work I was doing
Work.
as a
Yeah.
development practitioner or policy advocate. But it was only till I went through what I would like to believe was a rather painful transition in 2014 that I turned to writing in a more intentional way because it gave me a space to reflect, to think, and to heal. That was the time I started writing the Loud Whispers essays. And then in 2016, I started the Above Whispers website. And so, yes, so since that time, I've written, virtually every week. And it's something that brings me a lot of joy. And when people ask me, where do I find the time as a public figure? I say, well, you find the time for things that are important
Whatever
to
you
you.
love. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, if we women can find the time to get our hair done, to get our nails done, and these are not things that you do in a hurry, or if men can plunk themselves in front of television and watch sports for a couple of hours, leaving the world to take care of itself, yes, you can find time to do the things that are important to you.
Absolutely,
Amazing.
absolutely. I think one of the things that resonates from what you said is, I think I can draw some similarities between your dad and my dad, because even as a young boy growing up in the house, then we're always made to write. So my dad gave, or whenever we came back on either short or long holidays, my dad would give my siblings and I, writing assignments and say, oh, whoever writes the best essay, random things. Whoever writes the best essay would get this money or something, and so it was always a challenge. I think I got a couple of those gifts though, and when you said he was an accountant, my dad is also an accountant, so that's why I say I can draw similarities. Maybe there's something about accountants and writing, or male accountants and writing. But yeah, that's very very good to note, man.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And I totally feel that some of these habits or reading as it were and even writing is something that it makes sense to actually imbibe from the early age. And so when you've made it like a culture or a habit. It just becomes second nature to you. And so it doesn't even seem like a chore to Erelu that she has to pen down something on a weekly basis. And I must commend the consistency. I think that part is one of the things that young people or people of my generation tend to like struggle with, like the capacity to be able to show up even when you're gifted or you're good at something. I think there's a huge role that consistency played. And of all the things you said, that's the lesson that I'm taking away very quickly, that, you know, it's not just enough for you to be so skillful, for you to be so good at something. You also need to learn to show up and be disciplined at it as well. In my head, I'm still curious, like, wait, oh, she travels a lot. She's a wife, she's a mother, she does so many things. Wait, does she now like take away, has to carry her phone every time, type away on her note, or she has to sit in front of a computer and all of that, which actually leads me to like the next question around what your writing process is like. I know writing is an endeavor that can be very, very demanding when it comes to time. There's some authors that claim that they tend to like write really well around loud music, or, you know, they have to go on a retreat somewhere very quiet, somewhere close to nature and all of that, and make sure that the ambience is like perfect. So we really want you to share a bit more about what your writing process is like. Do you have like an outline? Do you map out your thoughts before you then delve into developing that?
Well, I think what comes to me first when I'm writing is, once I've decided what I want to write about, I just get everything out there from the heart. Because to me,
Okay.
authenticity and simplicity is very important. As women in particular, and in particular, African women, we are socialized into believing that what we have to say or what we know is not as important as what other people have to say or what other people know. And so we've always been subtly shut out of the construction of knowledge and the ability to tell our stories the way we understand them to be as they impact on our lives. And so for me, it's important to, especially when people make comments about how easy my writing is for them to read, I believe I
Yeah.
don't need to write in ways that make it difficult for people to understand, because those are the very constructions that we are supposed to be fighting against as Black intellectuals or as African feminists. And so it's important for me to get everything I want to say out there once I've agreed on what I want to write. And then I go through, that's the first draft. The zero draft is, what do I really want to say without filter? And then the other drafts can be, okay, maybe let me now go through and start sifting things out so it's a bit more coherent, or it's not as, angry as, it might sound initially. And then, of course, my writing has to do with my mood. Sometimes
Okay.
I'm upbeat about a topic or about certain things, and that reflects in what I decide to write. And some of the essays I've written in the 3 Loud Whispers volumes reflect that. And sometimes I'm angry and I just want to vent and, get things out there, especially when I'm writing about things like sexual violence or preying, religious institutions, preying on vulnerable women and children. And then sometimes I just want to have fun or just poke the bear, so to speak. And, I write things that people don't really expect. And then I get calls like, oh, Bisi, Erelu. No, you didn't say that. Yeah, I did. So, and an example is the Mothers Union, which is an imaginary meeting I put together.
Yeah.
I'm a member of the Mothers Union, by the way.
I'm like, why is she shaking this table? That part, I'm like, what did I just read?
Yeah. So let me put together an imaginary meeting of women, in the church talking about, something, that just happened that people need to have an opinion about, right? And yes, and some young people were surprised that I'm a gamer, as in, when Game of Thrones was still on, I was a huge fan of Game of Thrones. And I think I wrote 3 essays on Game of Thrones. So, yes. It depends on my mood. But of course, once I've got the material together, then I have to go through a process of fact checking to make sure that what I'm saying is totally accurate with dates, facts, figures, depending on what I'm talking about, and also to make sure that it's carefully edited and all within a particular time frame, because these are things I have to get out on a weekly basis. So yes, it's not set in stone, and after a while, you find your own rhythm.
Yeah, talking about the
Absolutely.
different modes that you
Shay, I know you
often
have a lot of
have.
questions.
Yeah, talking about different modes that you often have. When I saw the title, it seemed very different. Where's your rapper? Like, why are you asking me where my rapper is, right? But now reading the particular essay where the title came from, I can imagine what sort of mood you must have been when you wrote that. Whether you were really angry after you saw that our society, or how often you see the things that our society has become. Where you spoke about a lady that was sort of maybe mentally deranged at the time, and people would rather take out their phones, or some would try to stone her, while others rather than try to cover her up, bringing out their phones and putting it on Instagram. It says a lot about what our society has become now, where when we see a call for help, we see a lady that was on the streets, and rather than people, helping her cover her nakedness, people would rather just make a video, and how our empathy has been replaced with, the need to trend. Our empathy has been replaced with the need for likes and comments, and the need for posts on Insta blog per se. What would you say about how this is further degenerating, rather, and how it has continued to eat deep into the fabric of our humanity?
Thank you, Shay. Now, you need to note that someone like me comes from a generation where we did not grow up with all these devices. And
Mm-hmm.
so the culture of having to record every single second of your life is not something that we are familiar with. We understand that it is something that appeals to this generation, but it is not something that we grew up with. We grew up with the understanding that we had a role to play in society depending on your age or where you were located or what platform you occupied. And so we did the things that we needed to do regardless of whether we had an audience or not. So there are certain things that I find strange, and please don't call me old fashioned. I might be, but I have no apologies for it. So when I do things or say things or post things, I do not care if there are any likes, and I do not care if there are people who are interested or uninterested. It's nice to get feedback, but it
Mm-hmm.
is not, doing things because you want people, as you young people say, you're chasing cloud. Chasing cloud is not a culture that we grew up with. And in Where's the Rapper, what I was actually trying to do was call attention to the difference between our responsibility as human beings, as citizens, as people with empathy and compassion. And, to draw a contrast between that and those who believe that what is important is being seen, being heard,
Yeah.
being liked, being acknowledged. And so, if you're going to a marketplace and see a woman about to deliver a baby, what is your first instinct? My instinct as a feminist activist, as a woman, would be to pull out my wrapper in
Mm-hmm.
literal and metaphorical terms.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, that wrapper signifies a sense of duty. My responsibility to ensure that another human being, another woman, is being her dignity is being protected. She's being covered. She
Yes.
has support. She has solidarity. That's my first instinct. My instinct is not to grab my phone and start recording, which is
Mm-hmm.
which is what a lot of people feel they should do. And so we need to ask ourselves, what is important? My duty as a citizen, as a human being, to ensure that I protect another human being in the moment of pain and vulnerability, or am I just after chasing clouds
Chasing
and doing
clouds.
things
Yeah.
that people can consider me important or consider that I'm someone who has access?
To
And I
news.
think I don't like conversations that make it sound as if all young people like that, or all older people are sensible. No, What I'm just saying is I would like for us to have cultures that evolve around core values of empathy, compassion, responsibility, and duty to protecting one another, as opposed to living false lives or fake lives.
It's quite incredible that you mentioned that because nothing would have given that away from the title of the book. When you see the title, it just gets you curious and you're like, seriously, what's his where's my rapper? And so there's this interesting thing that I do in my workplace. It's an hybrid system. I'm probably like the only black girl on my team. And so most of the time, whenever I'm reading a book, especially the books that we're reviewing on a monthly basis, I always take it along to the office and probably put it right beside like my computer in the office. And sometimes it's always like the perfect icebreaker. And people who walk past my desk will be curious to know where is your rapper. No. And I think during the course of this past weeks, when I was doing that, people don't know that it's a deliberate effort, right? But thing that I do. But someone walked up to me and picked up the title and was just like, "What's this about?" And then the cover itself actually has some African-inspired patterns itself, which I think is such a beautiful way to depict what this book is about. And for me, I think Where is Your Rapper is a call for more empathy. And whether you're male, whether you're female, there's a need for you to always think first about how am I being humane to the next person? How am I being kind enough to lend a hand of support, especially when people are, downtrodden or going through life sometimes. So that really stands out for me. Part of what I also did when I started reading this book was to do a post on my Instagram. Yes, Instagram generation, Erelu. Can't help it, right? I posted something on my Insta story that got people talking in my DM. And the first impression was that, oh my goodness, from a female perspective, and sometimes I don't feel comfortable with using the word feminist to describe myself, which is maybe something we get to later on in the conversation. But when I shared my first impression of the book on my Insta story, one of the things I was quick to highlight is that a lot of people only know you as a public figure because you were, wife of someone who was in the political space or is still very active in that space. And I'm like, why is it so difficult for people to come to terms with the fact that aside from her being a first lady or wife of, JFK, she's a fantastic writer. She's a very outstanding scholar. She's done so many things for herself in that right and in her own right. And I feel it takes a lot of audacity to, be able to put forward that aspect of your life in spite of the fact that sometimes I love to believe that being a first lady was just a hard on. Take that away from the equation. She's still a kick-ass woman. She's still a very inspiring figure. And I just really want to find out how, as a modern woman or a woman, as a contemporary woman who's like trying to find her path in life, and if you perhaps one of those women that are pretty very ambitious, and amongst so many things, the society kind of like reduces every other thing you've accomplished to, is she married? Is she a mother? Is she a wife? And so many of those nuances whenever it comes to the issue of the female gender. And I'm like, there's just so much pressure on the girl child. And there are some questions that nobody would dare ask a man that they will come forward to, probe a woman. I feel like I'm shaking table, right? Well, it's quite a very sensitive
They
question.
still ask men, Sha.
No, don't even start with me, Shay. That's where we're going to fight.
There's one of the essays in the book that was going just before you answer the question, just a side note. Did you eventually get Ichi to change his bio to husband and father while you answered the question? There was one of the essays. Did you eventually get Ichi to change his bio to husband and father? There was one of the essays that you wrote about, the Hillary Clinton.
You mean the essay I wrote on the interview that Chimamanda had with Hillary Clinton?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I didn't. I totally forgot about following up on that. But Toby, the thing is, a lot of people didn't realize, because I hadn't lived in Nigeria for a long time. I came back from England when my parents brought me back in 1969. and I went to school in Nigeria, and I went back to live in England in 1989. And I didn't move back to live in Nigeria on a full-time basis till my
Okay.
husband became governor of Ekiti State in October 2010. So I had lived
Okay.
outside of the country for a long time, and my career in international development and philanthropy and working on women's leadership around the African continent and in other spaces around the world was outside of Nigeria. And
Okay.
so outside of Nigeria, in the development community, people knew who Bisi Adeleye-Fayemi was. And
Okay.
there's this joke I have with my husband. There was a time he went to Uganda. I did a lot of work in Uganda. I was virtually living there at some point when we went to set up the African Women's Leadership Institute. I was based in London at the time with an African women's international organization known as Akinamama Africa. And we decided to set up this leadership program for women on the continent known as the African Women's Leadership Institute. So we set it up in Kampala, Uganda. So I have a vast network in Uganda. And
Okay.
eventually, Akinamama Africa in the UK moved to Uganda. And so they are now one of the leading women's rights networks on the continent. And so my husband went to Uganda for a human rights conference. I didn't go for that event. And so Akinamama hosted a reception for all the people, men and women who had come for that conference. So they hosted that reception in their office. And my husband was just standing there or talking to people, and people were passing him by, not paying him any attention. So someone then said, "Oh, meet Fayemi. This is Bisi Adeleye-Fayemi's husband." And people looked at him and said, "Oh, this is husband." And then my husband said, I then became a celebrity, and all the people who have been ignoring me then started to
Oh,
flock around me.
love it.
And then I said to him, okay, so now you men know how it feels. And so I moved back to Nigeria in October 2010. And before I moved back, when I left Akinamama Africa, I moved from London to Ghana to start off the African Women's Development Fund, which I co-founded with two other wonderful African women, Joanna Foster, may
Okay.
her soul rest in peace, and Hilda
Mm-hmm.
Tadria. And I was with AWDF as the first executive director from 2000 to 2010, and then I moved to Nigeria. And so when I moved to Nigeria, then I became the wife of Kayode Fayemi. And then, of course, you go to places, people who don't know you walk up to you and say, Your Excellency, we hope that this work is not stressing you too much. We hope that. So I just say, I'm fine, I'm good. When my husband spoke to me about wanting to go into politics and run for that seat, we had the conversation back and forth. And, we had an agreement that at least I'll be able to continue doing the work that was important to me. And I felt that if I could have spent all those years working on women's rights issues, women's leadership, creating spaces for women in different parts of the world, the very least I can do is to bring that back home. Charity begins at home. And so that's why I spent a lot of
Yes.
Okay.
time on those issues in Ekiti State as well. And so it's okay for women to find their voice, regardless of where
Mm-hmm.
they are, regardless of whatever platform they occupy. For me, being the first lady was just one other platform. And you'll find many people will tell you you can't, you shouldn't. Why? And so my response would be, why not? Just, whatever space you find yourself in, figure out what's important to you to achieve. Keep speaking, keep writing, whatever applies to you. And always know that you are worthy. And that's why it's important for fathers in particular. Mothers do it all the time, but fathers in particular should keep telling their daughters, you are worthy. Because when you grow up with a healthy dose of self esteem, no one can tell you are not worthy and that you don't deserve the respect and dignity that is due to you.
Fabulous.
Absolutely. I think that's a very strong take, which I so much agree with. And it takes me to one of the essays that you also wrote about, the lives of the wives of political figures. That line that you said, where people meet up with you and say, "Oh, hope you are not stressed. Hope this work is not too much." They sort of do not understand that you already have built capacity doing other things, and so being operating in that office of the first lady is perhaps even the least thing that you had done in quite a while, right? But one thing that One thing that you said, that, or rather that I read in the book, is how you talked about a lot of people try to make that office look small, to say, oh, and there are always conversations around, oh, it's not in the
Trivialize
constitution,
it,
it's
right?
not
Is that the
this, it's
word?
not that.
Yeah.
Yeah, trivialize it, and it's not this, it's not that. But when they want to get something from the main figure, they still come through the woman. When there are events that needs to be done, when there are social deliverables that need to be achieved, they still come to the woman. So I was going to ask that, do you think that there's a lot more awareness, or there's a lot more work that needs to be done on just resensitizing people about the fact that, yes, now in some countries we have first men anyways, just like the husband of the vice president of the US, well, not the first man in this case, but
Yeah.
what do you think should be accorded to spouses of political office holders? Do you think enough is being done, or do you think a lot more can be done?
Okay, so this is a topic that has been debated for a long time and all around the world. The role of the first lady, the role of the first spouse, what does it entail? What does having access to the person who has been voted for mean? What does it mean when someone is always has the opportunity to be the one whispering into the ear of the leader? Does it mean that this is one way of some people holding on to power undemocratically? Does it mean is it another form of corruption, non-transparency, and so on? And in fairness, considering our history in a country like Nigeria, particularly under military rule, where some of those relationships got a bit mad in a lack of accountability, lack of transparency, and so on. We do have cause for concern around the office of the first lady, or the office of the spouse. Having said that, and I've been warned, when I was a lot younger, I did have cause at some time to write a critical essay about the office of the first lady, because my concern then, my instinct at the time, was that these women could be doing really important
Wow.
things with the space they occupy. Why don't they focus on the things that are able to change using those positions, as opposed to using the positions just to mobilize around state interest? But having found myself in that position myself, of course, one of the first things I asked myself when I became a first lady was, how do I now use this platform with the values that I believe in, with the things that I believe I bring to the table? How do I do this in a way that is transformative? And one of the first things I decided to do was to not apologize for the position of power and influence I found myself in, because men never apologize.
Absolutely.
So good.
What I decided to do was to keep reminding myself that I'm in this position for a reason. And if I'm in this
Hmm.
position, I need to be able to use it to change things, to make the lives of women in particular better, to ensure that we have laws and policies and processes that can change the lives of women. And that whatever this administration wants to achieve, they do it with the full and equal participation of women. And so we move away from rhetoric to things that mean something in the lives of women and children. And I believe by the end of my husband's 2 terms in office, I was able to achieve that, to a large extent. People in Ekiti got to associate the name Erelu-Fayemi with change when it comes to the status of women, and particularly when it comes to change around the political and social landscape as well. And one thing I discovered, a lot of people might not fully understand this or agree with this, was that a lot of the issues around, oh, this first lady is too overbearing, oh, we don't want this first lady to be involved in this. Some of it is also to do with the way in which people believe that women's roles should always be domesticated. If women are taking up
Mm,
roles in
Yeah.
the public space, they should be roles that are not threatening to men, or they should conduct themselves in ways that are not threatening to them. If they happen to be the spouse, they should behave like a spouse. We should just hear of them. We should not be seeing them. So there's a
It's
there's
no
a
overstep.
tinge of sexism and misogyny thrown in there, because they know that if there's a first lady who applies herself to something that is meaningful, change will happen. And I was able to prove that when in the year 2020, some of us first ladies in Nigeria got together. At the time, my husband, Dr. Candid Fayemi, was chairman of the Nigeria Governors Forum. And so we were able to convince the governors at the Nigerian Governors Forum to declare a state of emergency on sexual and gender-based violence. It was unprecedented, not just in Nigeria, but for the entire continent. And from there, we were able to provide space for a lot of voices within government and in civil society to take concrete action against trying to mitigate sexual violence. And that came about as a result of some of us saying, we have this power, we have this platform, let's use it in meaningful ways, as opposed to hiding on the black market. Because the black market is where everyone knows where it is, and everybody pretends that they don't go there, but you know that what you want, that's the only place where you can get it. So I decided that first ladies were not going to be on the black market anymore.
Absolutely
Audacious.
fascinated by all of the work that you did, especially around gender-based violence. And I was going to touch on it. I know that at the time when you pushed and clamored for that enactment of the law, it was also unprecedented in Nigeria. How was it at the time when you did that? Did you have a lot of pushback as to why you really doing this? Like, especially from my
You
gender,
mean
did they say yes, the gender-based prohibition of gender-based violence act in Ekiti State at the time? So
okay, so yes, so we got the Gender-Based Violence Prevention Act passed in 2011. We were not the first state in Nigeria to have laws against gender-based violence. Lagos State, I believe, was the first state. But what we did in Ekiti, we decided to broaden our understanding of gender-based violence and then put in place additional provisions to ensure the protection of survivors of gender-based violence. So our law in Ekiti, for example, have provision for a survivors fund for survivors of gender-based violence, and also reference to a sex offenders register. And it was during my husband's second term that at the national level, this sex offenders register then got to be a national program that was taken on at the national level. And in 2019, this was during our second term now, we reviewed the 2011 law so that we could harmonize it with the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act that was passed in 2015. There were aspects of the VAP Act that were stronger than our own law that we had passed in 2011, and there were aspects of our own law that were stronger than the VAP law. So we decided to do some revision, and then we passed the revised GBV law in Ekiti State in 2019. But just for the record, during my husband's 2 terms, I was able to work with other stakeholders, the ministries of justice, civil society, women affairs, and other important stakeholders to get 7 laws passed, not just the GBV law, 7 laws that could promote and protect the rights of women and vulnerable persons in the state. And all these are documented in different essays that I've written in either Where's Your Rapper or in the latest collection, Demand and Supply.
Speaking of demand and supply, I wonder what actually inspired that title. I don't know if you want to take a few minutes to shed light on what people should expect when they pick up a copy of Demand and Supply. I haven't managed to go through it yet, but I know that following the other titles in that particular series is going to be outstanding as well. I don't know if you really want to quickly touch on that.
Thank you, Toby. Well, Demand and Supply, the essay itself, because what I do is I pick an essay from the book and make that the title of the book. Apart from the first collection, Loud Whispers, which was generic. When I did Where's Your Rapper, I picked up an essay from the book and made that the title. So for the latest collection of essays, Demand and Supply, the essay I wrote on that topic was to do basically with the demand for services around sexual violence, the things that we need to ensure that victims of sexual violence move from being victims to survivors. Those of us in the women's rights movement, we don't refer to those who have gone through any form of gender-based violence as victims. We prefer to call them survivors because we feel that that is a way of ensuring that they have their power back and can take
Yes.
control over their lives. And that naming and framing is extremely important. But the truth is, when you've just gone through a violent assault, or when you have just left a violent relationship, you are a victim.
Yes,
But it
absolutely.
is the quality of the services that you receive, the kind of support you receive, whether it is
Support.
access to justice, whether it is psychosocial support, whether it is financial support for you to get back on your feet, get a new apartment, take care of your children, or have a place to lay your head. It's the quality of interventions that come your way that turn you from being a victim into a
Victim to a
survivor.
survivor.
And so that essay was about the vast needs that are out there from victims for them to become survivors. There's such huge demand and there's such a shortage of supply, such a shortage of services. And the services range from, as I said, psychosocial support, responsible champions to take up their cases, adequate shelters, sexual assault referral centers, and so on. And then, broadly speaking, as women, we have made so many demands over so many years for our dignity, for rights, for economic empowerment, for political participation, for a whole range of things. We keep making all these demands. We keep being promised. And these promises are made through national laws, policies, the Beijing Platform for Action, the Africa Agenda 2030 for the SDGs, and so on. But there is such a shortage of supply in terms of these rights and these resources that are supposed to come our way to turn our lives around for the better. And that is why a country like Nigeria keeps featuring very poorly when it comes to indices around gender equality and women's empowerment.
Yeah, talking about demand and supply, I think I'll just take it a step. I'll take you a step back to one essay that you wrote, where you touched on when you paid your son's school fees in Ghana, and what they wrote on the receipt or invoice and how they addressed it. And I see that I see some similarities to conversations that people have started to have around when a guy and a lady go to eat out, maybe either on a date or just a casual eat out. Why do the waiters always take the bill to the guy? Why don't they just leave it on the table? Or why don't they even give the lady? Why do they assume that the guy is the one paying? So, do you think that our society, not just the Nigerian society, but I think it's everywhere around the world, do you think society is beginning to think of this, think of it from that perspective, that it doesn't have to be the guy paying, it doesn't have to be the father paying the school fees, for instance, or the father paying for the holiday, for instance. It could be any either of the parents. It could be either of the partners, taking this as well as other responsibilities that the family or the relationship has to bear.
Okay, so each of my volumes has a section on relationships because I
Hmm.
come across a couple of arguments and debates online which I find very interesting. And sometimes people send me messages and say, Erelu, this conversation has been going on. Why don't you write something about it? We want to know what you think. And I always tell people I find it very difficult to make comments about relationships because what works in one relationship might not work for another. And I
Exactly.
cannot use my own relationship as a yardstick for others because I come from a position of privilege, influence by virtue of my background, my age, and so on. But there are some fundamentals. So any couple that wants to get married, for example, need to agree on basic principles around respect, responsibilities, support for one another. Because there are times when one party will be in a position to provide and another
Hmm.
won't. And then times might change, and it could be the other way around. So we need to ensure that the expectations of both parties are managed. And when I attend weddings a lot as a matron of society, I attend a lot of weddings. So I sit through a lot of sermons, and I go, oh, oh God, no, please, no,
Oh,
not again. A lot of sermons and all kinds of, people saying all kinds of things. Like, and I think to myself, are you living in the real world? And a lot of times we set young people up to fail because they can't manage expectations. Recently, last week, my essay, if you have time, you can read about it. I wrote an essay on Ada Umeoji's table, the new CEO of Zenith Bank.
Yes.
okay.
And there's been this conversation lately around young men, saying to women, "What do you bring to the table?"
Mhm.
In January, I had a session with a group of teenagers, female teenagers, in a private school in Lagos. And this is one of these exclusive schools where their parents have resources. And so these girls, of course, are going to go places because they're going to leave that high school, attend universities within Nigeria and beyond. And one of the girls asked me, "So, what do you do, ma, when we have all these guys asking us, what do you bring to the table?" And I looked at them and I said, "Your parents are paying for you to have this kind of education so that you can go and build your own table.
And build your
No
own
man will be
tables.
asking you what you bring to the table. You have your own table." And so Adam Weji is one of those, is one in a long line of women who have their own table. No man is going to be asking Ada, "What do you bring to the table?" And so the thing is, I think the mindset we should be having is, and I think this is reflected in some of the essays I've written in all my books. No couple should be getting married if they are not prepared to look after themselves. The way we were brought up as young women is, no man will take care of you if you can't take care of yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
I have a son. I don't want my son to be the one huffing and puffing over his wife. Yes, he should be a responsible provider, but his wife too should also be able to make contributions. So couples should be able to bring something to a table. And no man should be placing himself in a position where he's the one, dictating who should have what. And then we have women fighting their nails saying, as long as he gives me money to buy hair and as long as he gives me money to do and to get the latest car, I'm fine. That marriage is not going to last because it's going to be built on unrealistic expectations. Every marriage, every relationship should be built on respect, hard work, and mutual support for one another. And all these frivolous expectations and chasing clouds and trying to live like the next person online, that is something that has just started creeping in. Those are values we should be moving away from. Otherwise we will not be able to have the kind of relationships that encourage vibrant, healthy communities.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for weighing in on that earlier. And I think some of your responses are like I've literally answered some of the questions that I had in mind, and they've been all spot on. Um, I want to take us back to where it all began in terms of your tenacity and everything you stand for as a women's right activist. So I'm just curious to know how that journey began for you. I know for someone in your generation, it almost seemed like something, I don't know if the word to use is unheard of or it's like a road less traveled for you to have women that are very vocal about the things that they strongly believe in. Needless to mention them standing at the forefront of championing for, those causes. And so the question is going to be in two folds. Like, how did that journey begin for you, and what perhaps actually sowed that seed in your heart to even venture and say that yes, I want to be that person who is championing and putting in place measures, policies, and platforms that would help women thrive. And second of all, in this age and time, feminism has been termed to, become something with all sort of obscene connotations in the sense that, at my core, I believe I'm one of those women that cannot stand, inequality whenever it comes to gender. But I kind of like shy away from using that word because you tend to be misconstrued. If you tell an average guy, for example, not like I'm apologetic about it anyways, there's a tendency where you mention to a guy that, oh, I'm a feminist. The next thing that comes to the mind of that person is, oh, the kind of feminists you see on Twitter, the types that are just always very hungry and it's almost like they are bashing the other gender and all of that. And I'm of the school of thought that men can also be feminists as well, you know. And so I just wonder, how can we strike a balance, or how can we uphold the true ethos of feminism, as it were? So two questions: how did it all begin for you, and then what can we do to make sure that, the true essence of this whole movement is not lost due to, social, what's the name, modernization, and what is not? Because if I were you go to some of these Twitter feminists and ask them, really, what's the meaning of this theory or school of thought, many of them will stop that. They will not even have the right thing to say to answer you and all. So yeah, really love your take on that.
Okay, thank you, Toby. Well, I think I've spoken about my father and the influence he had on me, encouraging me, giving me a lot of confidence. And I grew up with a lot of women around me, my mom's sisters, my aunts, and they had friends in the neighborhood. So there were always these women coming around together to share stories. And then I knew of their own experiences with their relationships and so on. And there was always a sub story. There was always one of them crying over some man. There was always some kind of injustice that had been done to them. There was always someone who had been beaten and hurt and humiliated or abandoned. And I remember asking, why is this happening? And the response I would get is, well, that is what a woman's life is like. And my response would be, but why? Why should a woman's life be like that? And then the response would come back again, because women don't have a choice. And so I believe that is what came to be the root of my rebelliousness, call it whatever you want, my activism, finding a voice, taking a position. I wanted to be able to say women have a choice. Women's lives should not be framed by others. Women's lives should not be framed by, dictated by patriarchal norms and values. Right from the time we are born, the life of a girl child is always perceived to be not as important as that of a boy child. When in many communities, when you have a girl child, you kill a chicken on the seventh day for the naming. A chicken is great. Everybody likes to eat chicken. When you give birth to a boy, you kill a goat.
Okay, like goats.
So what does that tell you about the value you are placing on the worth and the expectations of one gender vis-a-vis the other? And so I have always believed that women should have choices. Sometimes we might make foolish choices or the wrong choices, but those choices should be ours to make, with control over our lives, our bodies, and our destinies. And that then leads me to your question around feminism. For me, my own definition of feminism has always been that it's a global struggle against all forms of patriarchal oppression. And patriarchy expresses itself through the existence of norms, values, and institutions. And they could be economic, they could be political, they could be social, they could be religious, cultural, technological, but these are all male-dominated systems and paradigms that are designed to keep men at the center of power and the control, and women on the margins. And every now and then, women are co-opted into those systems, because no system of oppression can survive without co-opting, some of its victims. And so women are co-opted into these institutions to ensure that things stay in place, to ensure that things stay the way they are. And so I see my role as a feminist as someone who needs to challenge patriarchal institutions, norms, and values, demystify them, dismantle them if it's possible, or at the very least, to contest them. And in the process of doing that, you find men and women of like minds.
Yeah.
There are men who believe that women have a right to a voice, women have a right to agency. There are men who do not believe that that is the case. And there are women who believe that women are making too much noise and making too much of a fuss. If they are raising these issues, it's okay. But what I believe is important is we should all want a society in which we all thrive as men, as women and those who have identities that are somewhere in between. We should all be entitled to space where we can use our voices, our skills, and the agency that we have without being told you can't do this, you can't do that, simply because you happen to be a woman. And so I think that's what I've dedicated my professional life to. And that is what I write, about all the time. Now, do I meet the resistance? Of course I do. And do feminists face struggles with regards to the naming and the framing and so on? Absolutely. But I have learned over time from those who mentored me, from the writers who I have read through the work that has been done by other African feminists and other feminists around the world, that whatever name we call it, as long as you're challenging power, as long as you're asking questions about why women cannot do certain things or why women should not have the space to do certain things, there'll be a pushback. And so my advice to younger women out there is for them to try and learn more, study more, read more, because feminism is not something, it's not a garment you put on in the morning and take off in the evening. It's a set of core values that you live with. That's how you live
Yeah,
your
that you
life.
live
So
with.
we need to figure out what that means for us on a daily basis. And patriarchy is, when we as feminists say we want to dismantle patriarchy, what we want to do is dismantle patriarchy, period, and check the men and the women who are sustaining those institutions and norms and values. We are not about to replace a patriarchy with a matriarchy. And so we
Hmm.
also are not saying that women should come in and replace that same male toxic space with
Exactly.
feminine toxic behavior. No, that's not what the feminist movement is about. I understand the need for women to express themselves in whatever way they can, because for too long our voices have been stifled. But at the
Yeah.
same time, what our community needs are healthy expressions of who and what we are as persons. And if we have a problem with someone taking away our voice and polluting our space, then we should not be the ones doing it to others either. So I hope
Absolutely.
that's helpful.
Absolutely. You've done such justice to this subject and provided a lot of insights. I think when Sheyi started off this um, episode by saying that it's going to be super educative and insightful, he didn't, he knew what he was saying because this actually over delivered on that. So thank you so much for really delving into so much detail and schooling us basically, which is one thing that the What Reading podcast is about, shining the spotlight on the issues that truly matter and affect the commonality of women, people, wherever, irrespective of your race or whichever part of the world you come from. So, on that note, we would really love to wrap this up. There's something we always do on every single episode of our podcast. We try to rate every book. And so I would be asking Sheyi very quickly on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate Where is My Rapper? And then I'll say mine as
uh,
well. Yeah.
where's your rapper? This is a very difficult one,
Sheyi is
actually.
one of those OAU lecturers. Erelu.
No, no, but in this case, I would say it's a 10/10 for me.
No.
Hey! Record breaking. Honestly,
Yeah.
I'm
You're
shocked.
just saying that. You're just saying that because it's me. Oh.
No, no. So I was going to say why. I was going to say why. What I find very very remarkable about this book is the range of issues that you touch on. Many of us are used to, people writing and maybe just writing prose, or when they write essays, the essays are just focused in one direction, either political essays, or they just write essays that tend to just talk about relationships. But I like the fact that you've captured the essence of your theme, and you've captured it in various ways. So if you are looking for something that has to do with relationships, you can find it here. If you are looking for something that has to do with politics and the woman in politics and all of that, you can find it here. So that's what I love about this. So it's not about this is not me being patronizing. This is me saying that I love the range. Number one, I also love the fact that There are times I look at, where you wrote this and I see the dates 2015. I go again, I see where you wrote about something that happened during COVID, how you added a couple of inches more and your clothes no longer fit. There are very few people that would write and give us as much detail as that. So that's why this book is a winner for me.
Nice. Very generous of you, Shay, I must say.
Very.
I'm like, I'm taken aback. But yeah, the book actually over delivered. That I must say for sure. Of course, like you're right, without trying to, repeat every single thing that you said. I love the fact that, all of the essays were grouped. There was something there's actually something for everybody in Where is Your Rapper? And if you, because I understand that we have like such a diaspora audience, people that listen to us from different part of the world, and from the
Yeah,
statistics, I think
23
we have
countries
even more people.
actually. Six continents, 23 countries.
Nice. I mean, I feel that if you're one of those people that want to take a deep dive to, happenings and experiences, like a first-hand account of the experience of a woman in Africa, and someone who also understand the context that those experiences play globally as well, then Where's Your Rapper is like a perfect resource for you to, take time to delve into. And it will not actually feel like a chore. It's like you're sitting down with your big mommy who is just like having a quick chat and has stories for days and just for days that you would never get tired of. And those stories are told in the most interesting manner. I
In
believe
the most
that
simplistic
simplicity,
and
yeah,
interesting
simplicity is
manner.
like the soul of great writing. There are some authors or there are some writers that try so hard when they're trying to be very flowery with their words. I understand the aesthetics of, literature in itself, but sometimes your heart just wants or yearn for, the simplicity with which the message is being passed across, and you don't want to embellish it too much. So that way it's in the right spot, it is delivering or tugging the right strings in your heart. And Where is Your Rapper actually did that for me. And on that basis, I will be giving it a 9/10. Yes. I totally highly recommend it. I'm probably going to do like a reel on this on Instagram, because I
Oh,
feel more young people should read a book like this, and it
Actually,
helps you put
yes.
things into perspective. We can't really recommend this enough. And so, on that note, we want to say a very big thank you to Erelu for being our guest on this episode. It's been such a thrill chatting with you, getting into your mind, understanding what actually drives you, what really inspires all of the laudable work that you've done over the years. And we just hope that, your legacy transcends generation. Like it doesn't end here, that many people, many women, my children, when they come would when they are mentioning names of formidable women that were at the forefront of paving the way for whatever progress they experience, that your name will be written in the sound of time, and we'll continue to hear amazing stuff
thank
about you.
you. Thank you so much. It's been such a delight to be here, spending time with you and doing this. So, and I feel encouraged because like other writers out there, you write, you don't know who's reading your work, you don't know how it will
Hmm.
resonate. So,
Yeah.
you've given me a lot of encouragement. So yes, I'll keep at it.